Recording. Welcome to the Fellowship Hall, not the library. The reason we are here tonight is because the youth ministry usually meets here on Sundays, but they're out tonight. So they told me you can use the Fellowship Hall. So that's why we're here. The reason I want to explain a few things is that, first of all, those of you who have been before with Nights of the Library, I always prepare a meal that relates to the topic. And today I thought, what am I going to do? We're going to talk about the adoration, so...
They can't hear you. They can't hear you.
Okay. Well, I can use both of these. Sorry, I'll use both of these then. Because we're talking about adoration, I thought bread. So I thought about it, and that's why you have 5 samples of bread, 3 that I make and 2 that I bought. And then grapes, all 3 kinds of grapes, white, or green, and red, and, dark. And then we made a bread pudding, which I had never made. So is it good? Is it good? Good. Okay. There's lots of, thank you. There's a lot to put there, so help yourselves, for seconds and thirds and whatever. We're privileged to have a very special speaker. I had another program scheduled for tonight, but I was asked to replace it with hers because we are going to start our 50th anniversary, adoration for 50 days in March 26th. So she had to come before that. And she brought out copies of the book that she wrote. So afterwards, if you have time, you may want to take a look and buy them if you want to. I got permission to do that. We have to get permission for everything around here. So. But anyway, I will not do any more introduction because I'd rather have her do her own introduction for you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you all so much for coming to ask me to speak about the fruits of Eucharistic adoration. This is a subject that is very close to my heart, and I was directed to write a book about miracles that have happened as a result of adoration. It has 40 short God stories in it, and they're all about the lives of everyday people, real people, and they're all because of adoration. So first, I really would like to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in an Italian-Irish immigrant family in Brooklyn. Can you tell by my accent? I've been here 49 years. And I still have my Brooklyn accent, and I don't think I want to get rid of it, because people really kind of enjoy it. So, I went to all Catholic schools when I was a kid, growing up in Brooklyn. But in my senior year of high school, I couldn't apply to go to college because my dad lost his job, and at 16, I had to go out and support my family. So because I was so young, I couldn't find a job that I could supported my family with. They wouldn't hire me until one day I went into AT&T and I was being interviewed by the woman and I started to cry. And then she hired me as a long distance operator, and that's when you used to put the plugs in the wall in order to connect to people. That's how long ago that was. It was really kind of fun though. But then I wanted a full-time job, not just being a telephone operator. So I went to work for the FBI. I was 17 years old working for the FBI in New York City. And I can tell you some fun things having worked for the FBI. I one day was with an FBI agent and we followed a Russian spy to the United Nations building. Another time I was in my neighborhood, which was a mafioso neighborhood, definitely, all Italian immigrants, all longshoremen working on the waterfront. That's what my dad was a longshoreman. And the next day I go to the office and these 6 criminal squad agents surround me. I'm 17 years old, and they said, what were you doing on the corner of Court and 3rd Place at 6:05 last night? I said, what? I was waiting for my girlfriend to go to the movies. They said, we were going to get the Gallo brothers. They were doing a sting. They had 10 squad cars, but they saw me standing on the corner, and they figured I was an informant for the Gallo brothers, so I blew the sting, and they couldn't do it. It was really funny. Then another time, I was at the office and having lunch with my coworkers, and in walks Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General at the time, and he asked if he could sit and have lunch with us, and we did. So I had lunch with Bobby Kennedy at the FBI office. The one last thing that I acquired while I was working for the FBI was how to pick locks. The FBI agents gave me my own lock-picking set, so that, because I was a file clerk, and I used to have to find the files for the agents, and the agents would lock them in their desk drawer, but one of the agents said, I'll teach you, and so nobody could figure out how their files would disappear until a couple of years later, somebody told them that I was the lockpicker. So, anyway, a few years after the FBI, I was hired by American Airlines, and once again, it was as a file clerk. I had no education, just a kid from Brooklyn. But it took me 5 promotions to become a res agent. That's how low on the totem pole I was. But that Italian work ethic kicked in, and I worked my way up to be an executive, responsible for the training of all employees except pilots and maintenance. Pilots had their own building, and maintenance was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My employees nicknamed the school, which is out at 360 and 183, the house that Marge built, because I put 200,000 square feet addition at a cost of $29 million, and that was in the early 80s. So I spent more money there than anybody had spent since they built it in 1957. But the fact that, I want to tell you, the fact that I'm standing here giving you a talk is in itself a miracle to me. I had this overwhelming fear of speaking in front of a group of people. So often, because I was the executive, the head of training for American, I would get calls from all these companies asking me to come and talk about our training programs. But I had such a fear that I would always send my directors or my managers, and I would never do it. Do you know that the fear of talking in front of a group of people is the #1 fear? More than the fear of dying, more than the fear of flying. But so I had to deal with that. In the 90s, I took an early retirement from American Airlines because we adopted a child from Romania who needed tons of therapy. I don't know if any of you know anybody that adopted children from there, but they were tied up, bound, in total darkness, never spoken to. Our daughter was blind. She didn't have a muscle in her body. She was 27 months old when we got her. She couldn't speak because nobody ever spoke a word to her. We didn't know she was blind, but when we went to the, she was always holding things like this. We went to the eye doctor here. He said, hey, I'll give you these little glasses, but we didn't know they were just glass. But he said, come back in 3 months because he wanted us to bond with this blind child. When we got back there in 3 months, he started screaming. I said, what are you doing? He said, she can see, and I don't know why. So God healed her of her blindness. She became a black belt in Taekwondo. She did all that kind of stuff. So she overcame much except anxiety issues. But anyway, when I took that early out, I said to the Lord, I'm going to work for you now. But I wanted to have nothing to do with speaking in front of a group of people. Please, okay? What was the first thing that you think he gave me to do? Speak in front of every Mass at St. Monica's about Eucharistic adoration. So watch out what you pray for, because he's a real joker, and I often picture him grinning, thinking about how silly we are when we think we know the best thing to do. Okay, although I was brought up Catholic, when I went out to the world, I became a hippie-type free spirit, and I no longer practice my faith. But the Catholic upbringing came back when I met my husband. We both knew that to get married legally, validly, it had to be in a Catholic church. So I tell you this because I want you to know that I'm no holy roller, because I'm an ordinary sinner, just like the rest of us. But sometimes people erroneously think that when you write a book about God's stories, that you're holy. And that is not true. What the book really depicts is how intimately God is involved in our lives, how he's still there, although in today's world, we've eliminated him in so many ways. That's why when people ask me to sign the book, I refuse, because it's not my story, it's God's story. And the title is Non Nobis Domine, which means not me, but you, Lord. So I tell people that want the book, that ask God to sign it, and hopefully he'll sign it on their heart or their soul, probably not on a piece of paper. So when I came back to the church, I came back with a vengeance, and I became involved in many Catholic endeavors. I'll tell you, once word gets out that you're a volunteer type, you have to run for cover because you're sought after by so many groups. I was on the board for Catholic Pro-Life Committee for 14 years, and I stood outside abortion clinics for many of those years. I wanted to convince women not to abort their babies, and there's a story in there that will show you why I was driven to do that. There are several really amazing stories in the book about God's providence outside that abortion clinics, but I'm going to tell you about one story, and it's Tanya is the name I give the little girl in this book. I was outside the clinic with the prayer warriors. The prayer warriors would always back me, and I was the one that, for some reason, would be the one that would speak to the people coming to get their abortions. This beautiful African-American lady pulls up and gets out of the car, and I immediately go off to offer her my help so she wouldn't have to get the abortion. She said, I'm not the one going for the abortion. I'm bringing my 11-year-old to have an abortion. I then saw this young girl sitting in the car, and I started to cry because my daughter was 11 at the time, and I couldn't imagine this. I couldn't stop weeping. I tried to convince her, but she was adamant that there was no way, there was no other option. I even offered to escort her to the pro-life clinic, which I had never done before. I would just give people the directions on how to get there. Suddenly, she looks at me very strangely and said, okay, I'll follow you there. She confessed later that on the way there, she told her daughter, I have no idea why I'm following this white lady to some place that I know nothing about, to do I don't know what. Thankfully, we were able to arrange everything for her. We found a fine maternity home and carefully ensured that no one would ever find out that she was pregnant. Right now, you're probably thinking, what a wonderful miracle. But that's only part of the story of God's unlimited love. Months later, when Tanya went into labor on her 12th birthday, she wanted me present at the delivery of the baby. I was honored to be asked, but when the doctor arrived in the hospital room, I had to leave the room because only 2 people were allowed, and the maternity home house mother and her mom were there. I was frantically praying outside at the nurse's station for a safe delivery, when suddenly Tanya's mother comes running out of the room, weeping uncontrollably. I was so frightened, thinking that this 12-year-old had died in delivery and it was all my fault. But then the house mother yelled at me, you better go to her, you better go to her. And I found her mother sitting on the floor in a fetal position, banging her head against the wall, saying over and over, I let him live, I let him live, I let him live. I got down on my knees to console her and ask her, what's wrong? She tearfully confessed that she personally had 5 abortions. And when she saw the baby coming from Tanya's body, all she could think of was the 5 babies that she had killed. I then heard myself say, God must love you very much because he allowed your 11-year-old to get pregnant so that this time you would make the right choice. She stopped, she took a deep breath, looked at me and said, do you really believe that that's true? I told her I really did. God in his mercy knew that this time she'd have the courage and the help to do what was right. I had no idea where those words came from, but God was speaking to her through me, a fruit of Eucharistic adoration. She wept more and then went to see the 8-pound, 11-ounce baby boy our daughter had just delivered. They chose a beautiful white adopted family for the little boy, and she told me prior to this incident she would never in a million years have thought she would relinquish her grandchild to a white family to raise. It was the immense love and generosity of all those white prayer warriors and counselors who proved to her that we are all brothers and sisters regardless of color. Priests and seminarians are another mission of mine. I became very, very involved with Holy Trinity Seminary. We must all pray for and support priestly vocations because without them, we're not going to have the Eucharist. So it's a very important mission. I was given a very large project concerning priests in the Adoration Chapel. It was the year of the priest. I was there, and one evening I went 11 to midnight, when I heard Jesus say, "What are you doing for my priests in this year of the priest?" I then asked myself, what am I doing? I have so many priest friends, I didn't even say thank you to anybody. I suspected that most of the people I knew hadn't even said thank you either. Then I heard, this is not about their personhood, but about their priesthood. So I made a to-do list in the Adoration Chapel. First, get a list of all the priests in the diocese. 2, design a thank you card, and then solicit people to send them. I pondered this during the hour, and somehow I knew that this is what God wanted me to do. So then I tested it on a few prayer groups that I was part of, and surprisingly, they all enthusiastically said yes, they would send these cards. However, then I got distracted, and I let the project slide until a man named Frank Kelly came to our parish at St. Monica. Frank Kelly prays over you, and sometimes he gives you words of knowledge. As he was praying over me, he opened his eyes and he said, "I never do this, but the Lord just told me, ask her about the project." I said to him, "What project? I have a lot of projects." He said, "You will know. Make a novena to Maximilian Kolbe. He will help with all the processes. To Claire Cece, because this is about the Eucharistic heart of Jesus. And Don Bosco, who will oversee the computer part." As I was obediently doing the novena, completely out of the blue, some friends came to offer help in something they knew not what. One was a person who was a processing person. One was a person who was an adorer of the Eucharistic heart of Jesus. And one was a computer person. So the team then decided the thank you card should be a postcard. No envelope, less expensive, and it would be a witness to postal workers. So I went to my old holy card file and to get ideas for what this postcard should look like. When all of a sudden this odd-shaped, sepia-colored card fell out of the file folder. I'd never seen it before, but I knew that this was the one that the Lord wanted. I had no idea if there was a copyright assigned to it, but I put a little copyright symbol next to it and so that it would show that it wasn't an intentional infringement. I was strongly cautioned by a friend that I put myself at risk of prosecution by doing this, and I flippantly said, "And I'll have to go to jail because I know this is what God wants me to use." The plan was that every person had to agree to send these spiritual cards to every priest in the diocese, not just the priest they knew. So they had stacks, and because I think at the time we had like 100 priests, and they had to do it for every priest. Since the volunteers had paid for the stamps, we successfully got the printing of the postcards underwritten. Once the word got out, the Fort Worth and Tyler Diocese eagerly adopted the same idea. Then I was friends with the Bishop of Camden, New Jersey. He heard about it. He invited me to present the project at a charismatic conference with 2,500 people from various dioceses. Now remember, I don't like to speak in front of a group of people, but there's 2,500 people at this. From that 15-minute testimony, 11 more dioceses came on board. One person in the audience, after seeing the picture, I held it up, told me she knew where it had originated from. When I went back home and looked at the website, it said there's a $500,000 fine or prosecution for any unauthorized use of this picture. I remembered my flippant "so I'll go to jail" remark, and how I'd have to tell my husband that his generous funding of my latest project was going to put me behind bars. So I finally got the courage to call the gallery which represented the picture. My first words to the gallery owner was, "I hope you're a man of God because I have a God story for you." He silently listened and then said he needed to talk to the lawyers and the owners and get back to me. I immediately sent him the postcard with the copyright symbol showing him that I didn't do it intentionally. And he told me I was using a distorted version, and he forwarded the real one to me. I was then granted full rights to use the original artwork as long as I included their website. The full story of how this picture came about is in the book. It was painted by a woman named Betty Myers, and it's an incredible story. I want to show you. This is the picture. And it's just so beautiful that people framed it. You know, when people have it by their bedside. And in each of my books, I put a picture of this for you all to have. And if you don't want to buy a book, I still have extra pictures, so you could all take a picture before you leave tonight. Okay, so Betty has passed on. She passed away, but through the postcard project, her masterpiece spread to different parts of the world and even went through Europe, which resulted in 250,000 thank you cards sent to priests, bishops, cardinals, and even the Pope. And some of them even wrote thank you notes if there was a return address on the postcard. So just as Frank Kelly said, this was the work of Maximilian Kolbe, Claire Assisi, and Don Bosco, because how else could this have happened in less than 8 months? It was really them. Okay, so I'm also a member of several other Catholic organizations, such as Sarah, Malta, St. Vincent de Paul, Catholic Daughters of America, Guadalupe Radio Network, and I willingly take on any other projects that God chooses to send my way. But I want you to know that the catalyst for all of these missions is a result of Eucharistic adoration. And now I'm going to explain to you how this all came about. Medjugorje is where it all started. Medjugorje is not yet officially approved, and it probably won't be until the apparitions cease. However, approval is given to go there on pilgrimage. It's an extraordinary place. Anybody been there? Lived here? Oh, wonderful. It's absolutely, in fact, many priestly vocations have come from Medjugorje. My husband and I went in the late 80s, and we actually witnessed the miracle of the sun. We saw the sun pulsating with rays of pastel colors emanating from it. We had no prior knowledge of this happening, and we didn't even want to admit to each other that we were seeing this. Then another miracle happened. Many years before the apparitions, the villagers felt called to erect an enormous stone cross on top of a very high mountain there in Medjugorje. One evening, I commented to the owner of the house we were staying at how magnificently the spotlight illuminated the cross on the top of the mountain. He told me there is no electricity on the mountain, but somehow, sometimes it becomes brightly lit as if it's on fire. Needless to say, from all we experienced there, we came home totally transformed. In the 90s, a Eucharistic retreat called U2000 was initiated in Medjugorje. The primary goal of the retreat was to bring young people before the Eucharist for an entire weekend. And I mean the entire weekend. Kids, we would have it in the gyms of parishes. Kids would sleep before Jesus on the floor in the gymnasium all night long. The retreats in Medjugorje had to cease during the Croatian War, but a woman in Dallas felt called to bring it to America. She recruited the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal to lead it, and she asked me to join the formation team. I barely knew her, but somehow I was called to this mission because God had a plan. While working at these retreats, I was stunned by the transformation of hardcore gang members and self-absorbed teens. At the end of the retreat, the kids unashamedly got up and witnessed before their peers about the experiences they had before Jesus in the Eucharist. It was mind-boggling to me. Even their priest youth leaders wept as they realized that all their efforts to entertain them or give them pizza did nothing. But 3 days before Jesus filled their hearts. Of course, not all kids were affected, only those who were open to extraordinary graces. And I'll tell you about one kid who affected me tremendously. He was a tough gang type who must have been pressured to come to the retreat by either his mother or his grandmother. You could tell the kid didn't want to be there. But by the end of the weekend, he was a totally different person. However, I left there wondering, was this going to last after he went home to his regular life? Years later, we returned to that same city for another retreat. In walks a young man with 7 others, all dressed alike. Same shirt, same pants, very short hair. Needless to say, they really stood out. But I recognized him as that very same gang leader. I came to find out that he now worked with troubled youth in a long-term detention center. The 7 young men with him were inmates. He convinced the warden to let him take them out of jail to sit before the Eucharist, to hopefully change them as it had changed him. He convinced the warden it was worth the risk because of his own first-hand knowledge of the immense power of the Eucharist to transform and heal. That experience made such an impression that it caused me to realize how powerful adoration is. This combined with the fact that each day I'd go sit in St. Monica's Chapel, waiting for my daughter's Bishop Lynch bus to arrive. It was always dark and empty. I'd sit there and weep, and I'd ask the Lord, are you all alone? You're the creator of the universe. If a famous person were here, no one would be able to get in the chapel. But here you are, all alone, every day. These encounters aroused in me the desire to initiate Eucharistic adoration in our diocese. With the approval of our pastor, the first daily adoration program in the Diocese of Dallas was started right in that chapel where I'd weep. It took 2 years of intense humiliation because Monsignor would hide or run from me or take a circuitous route to the church office in order to avoid me. Everybody used to laugh that, well, here she comes, and there goes Father running through the parking lot. Since the call was from God and not from me, I was relentless and could not let go and just hung in there until he finally said yes. Once St. Monica was established, people from other parishes would come to adore, and then they wanted it in their own parish. In fact, it was your parishioners here who asked me to help them so they could be the second parish to start adoration in the diocese. And it was Father Gray who persevered. If any of you are longtime members of All Saints, he was the one that we worked with to get it here. I would volunteer to present it to the pastor. The pastors could then challenge me, and sometimes very rudely, because they really didn't want to do this. But because then I could go home back to my parish, and all the committee from this parish could still be his friend. The challenge was worth it because we were successful in helping 12 other parishes start adoration programs, and now it's spread, and there's so many parishes here. But back in 1997, there was no parish that had a daily adoration program. St. Monica, being the first to step out in faith, received immense benefits from adoration. You remember the tornado that hit Dallas, a few years ago? It came down very severely in our area where our parish is located. There were 3 other schools and several churches of other denominations in that 5-block radius. All of those schools and churches experienced severe damage and were totally shut down for long periods. But not even one window was broken at our school or our church, another fruit of Eucharistic adoration. As I said at the beginning, God often chooses the most unlikely people to do his work. I was at a parish in Plano presenting adoration to the pastor there with a team from their parish. When one of the team members blurts out, she was at Woodstock. I groaned. I thought, great recommendation. Total silence. It was the longest minute of my life. Finally, the pastor says, now we know this is from God because it can't be from her. And yes, I was at Woodstock. But a funny side note to that story, that priest said no to starting adoration in his parish in Plano. A few years later, he was transferred to St. Anne's in Capel, where we had started the first perpetual adoration program. So God is a real practical joker. He must have a good chuckle assigning this priest to the only parish that has adoration around the clock. And some of you probably know who that pastor is now, and he gets a kick out of us teasing him about that all the time. So he doesn't mind us telling the story. After getting the go-ahead in 1997 to implement adoration at St. Monica's, I was worried about our church being locked up properly each night. So I personally attended adoration every night from 11 to midnight for 23 years until COVID shut it down. For 23 years, I was so energized after adoration that I couldn't even fall asleep till after 1 o'clock in the morning because of the energy you get from going to adoration. When you spend that many hours in total silence before the Eucharistic Jesus, I guarantee you will receive many inspirations. But I began to wonder, are these inspirations coming from me or are they coming from God? I really needed a priest to help me discern. Someone suggested Father Julius, who was a Cistercian monk, because he was a tough Hungarian who had escaped during the communist regime, and I needed someone tough. He agreed to take me on and has guided me for well over 15 years. After he witnessed all the fruits of adoration from these inspirations and the resulting projects, Father forced me to start writing them down. Others had suggested this to me many times, but I ignored them. However, I could not ignore Father. He put me under obedience. His reasoning was that in today's world, we're so media-oriented and so worldly that we have forgotten that God exists and that He is still intimately involved in our lives. He said people chalk up these encounters as coincidences, but they are really God incidences. He wanted the book to clearly remind people of this and to come to recognize it in their own lives. I was really reluctant to do it because my own shortcomings are revealed in the stories. He told me, get over it and just do it. The stories are not about only my encounters, but also about other real people who were touched by God or were His instruments. They're all different. They're about drug addiction. They're about suicide. There's one about a Jewish atheist, a Protestant family, abortion stories, and so on. But all depict God's love and mercy, and I thank all of those included in the stories for allowing me to share them in the book. It took several years, but with the help of people God sent my way to edit it, it was finally ready to be printed. I found a reasonable local printer to keep the price low. Father insisted people pay for it so they'd be committed to reading it. I take no profit because the only goal is for people to be touched and led to adoration. Just by word of mouth, in a few short months, over 800 self-printed copies were sold. Many bought numerous copies to give to friends and family, thinking that this was better than a bottle of wine or a bag of candy if the recipient was affected spiritually and emotionally. Then another God incident occurred. One person who bought numerous copies is on the prayer team at the St. Michael Exorcism Center in Washington, D.C. While in prayer, she felt the Lord tell her, this book needs to be officially published, not just locally printed, so it can reach more souls. She connected me with a Catholic publisher who offered a contract and made it available on Amazon. It has even been translated into Spanish. You just go to Amazon Books, put in my name, and it pops up. Since then, I've been interviewed on EWTN on October 13th and May 13th, both Feasts of Fatima. I've also been on several local Guadalupe radio programs. I'm asked to talk at different church groups like this one. I've talked to Legatus, Sarah, Malta, youth groups, even Fort Worth, and different places. So if there's ever a group that you feel would want to have a talk about adoration, I'm willing to do it. Hopefully that will bring more Eucharistic adorers. I'd just like to leave you with 3 things to ponder. First, life here is a preparation for eternity. This is the warm-up act, the dress rehearsal. We are made by God for God. Until we realize that, life doesn't make sense. We're striving for the beatific vision, but it's actually right here in a monstrance. Although we can't see with our earthly eyes in that simple host, His majesty and His beauty, we must have faith and trust in that reality. Saints have said that they've seen rays of light coming from the monstrance to penetrate the souls of those sitting before Him. They call it getting a sunburn of the soul. They also say that his heart pounds like the heart of a lover when his beloved comes to be with him. So if you can, please try to spend time in adoration in order to make your soul more beautiful and glorious in heaven. Secondly, I encourage you to always try to stay open to God's promptings because he calls each of us out of his generous love for not only us, but also for all those souls he wants to touch through us. Cherish the silence you're exposed to in adoration as the way to hear the still, small voice of God's promptings so you can be obedient to his will. I often tell people, we Catholics are so fortunate to have confession, to ask forgiveness for the sins we commit. It's the sin of omission I worry about. I don't want to stand before God one day where he's going to show me all he wanted me to do, but due to my laziness or my fear or not sitting in silence to hear him, I didn't respond. We each have specific talents and a specific purpose. We must strive to use our talents for his glory and to achieve our specific purpose on earth. I'll tell you a short story on the importance of listening to his promptings. One Sunday, I was at the 5 p.m. youth mass at St. Monica in the last row behind 4 young people who from their attire looked like a gang. When all of them went up for communion, I noticed one of the boys sauntering back to the pew with a hip hop and swinging the hose back and forth like that. The precious hose that he's hip-hopping back. I was really alarmed and I feared desecration of the Eucharist, so I tapped him on the shoulder and I told him it needed to be consumed. He looked nervously at me and shoved the host in his mouth. That evening, during my usual 11 o'clock hour of adoration in the chapel, I kept hearing the words, "Come find me, come find me, come find me." I was very perplexed and I thought it was my imagination and I tried to ignore it. Suddenly, the encounter at Mass that day popped into my mind. I was fearfully reluctant to go into that pitch-black church, but the voice was persistent. Overcoming my fear, I went to the dark church and got on my hands and knees under the pew where we had been sitting, and there it was, the curled up host that he spit out when I wasn't looking. If I had not been willing to be the fool, the Lord would have suffered more when the cleaning crew arrived. Be assured that when we sit in total silence and adoration, we can actually hear God speak to us. Third, one last thought. Whenever I have to make a presentation and I feel some reluctance, I convince myself that the Lord has at least one soul that he wants to touch in that talk. Often I'll look around the room and I'll ask, is that the one, Lord? Is that the one? But then I let it go because it's really between him and the soul. But one time, he let me know who the soul was. There was a lady who attended St. Monica's Bible study every Sunday for years and was a weekly adorer as well. One year, she felt compelled to be a sponsor for RCIA, which was scheduled at the exact same time as the Bible study she always went to. So she had to forego her usual Bible study. She had no idea why she felt this, but she signed up to be a sponsor because the promptings were so strong. Once the candidates entered the church on Easter Sunday, I gave a talk the following weekend on adoration to the new members of the parish. The year this lady volunteered to be a sponsor, the church called me to speak during Lent, which was very unusual. They told me the scheduled speaker had canceled and the theology of the Eucharist was already covered by a priest, so it was okay for me to speak because he already talked about the theology. And they really needed me to fill the slot, so I agreed to give the presentation to the class that Sunday. A week or so later, that same lady stopped me outside the chapel. She said she had something important to tell me. She explained that she had a brother for whom she had been praying for 50 years because he had lost his faith. She confided that the previous year she had gone to California where he lived to visit him and urged him to go to confession and make things right with his soul. He became extremely angry with her, and this caused great conflict in their family. When she was in the RCIA class and heard the talk on the Eucharist, she felt very compelled to write all that she was hearing and to mail it to her brother in a letter. She was really very scared because he was so angry with her, but somehow she overcame her fear and bravely dropped the letter in the mailbox. That morning, she joyfully told me he had just called to tell her that he and his wife had just gone to confession and communion after 50 years. It was the powerful words on the Eucharist in her letter that compelled him to return to the church. This was the first time that a God allowed me to see that one soul he wanted to reach. Who would have thought it would be a soul that lived thousands of miles away? But the story was not yet finished. Some days later, right after Lent, she stopped me again, this time with tears in her eyes, tears of joy with a touch of sadness. She told me that her brother had suddenly become ill and that the priest who heard his confession had rushed to the hospital. He had given him the last rites on his deathbed. He died on Good Friday, which was 1 week prior to the time when I'm usually scheduled to give the talk on the Eucharist to the RCIA candidates. God, in his infinite wisdom, knew the exact moment of that man's death. That is why all those so-called coincidences, which were really God incidences, took place, and the talk on the Eucharist was rescheduled. It was to save this man's soul. So I will close with just a few comments from readers on the book. Maureen, I cried while reading the book because I'm suffering so much now, but I feel hope because of the stories. Renee, I'm positive this book was written for me. I saw numerous times my husband's best friend committed suicide, but the suicide stories gave me hope for his soul. Sylvia, my fallen away niece reluctantly came to hear your talk and now has returned to the church. John, I read the stories more than once, and each time I get a different insight from the Lord. Randall, who is a Protestant, writes, I love the stories, but I have many questions for you. Tell me about relics. Do you have a saint that you pray to for back issues? I said, yes, I do. St. Gemma Galgani. He's Protestant, drives from Tyler, comes to my house, gets Gemma Galgani, flies to Minnesota, where his daughter is there on a very lucrative scholarship in college in a gymnastics team, but her back is out and she's going to have to lose her scholarship and fail out of college. They put the relic on her back. She just was on television last night doing a gymnastic meet, and she graduates this year, so she was healed. So I just asked the Lord, I thank the Lord for this opportunity to share his love and mercy with this faith-filled group. I humbly ask that if it is your will, that at least one soul tonight will come and adore you in the Blessed Sacrament. Thank you once again for having me, and may God bring you peace, joy, and love. Anybody has any questions? Or you have any? Okay, I don't know how to turn this thing off. Oh, I'll just leave it here.
That's all right. Just down on it. That's good. I just want to share one little thing, personal thing, and that's, of course, I'm Eucharistic. You can tell by the pin that I wear.
Well, I noticed that, so people...
But what happened to me a few years ago, my daughter's now over 50, but she was, I think, 4 years old, and we were in Portugal, and there was this procession of the, Eucharist coming out of a beautiful monastery of Geronimos. My father, my mother, myself, and my daughter were there. And my father did what he always did with me, because she was small, she couldn't see. He picked her up, put her on his shoulders, so she could see. And I took a picture because, this is just like it used to be with me when I was little. And the time I took the picture, the monstrance was going under the canopy with the bishop. And I call it my miracle picture. And I have it printed because you can see rays, beautiful color rays coming from the host.
That's a God incident. And we have to always recognize it and proclaim them, so that people now say they see it in their lives because they're becoming more aware of it. and
That's
they'll
right.
look for
That's
it.
right.
So.
But that's my miracle picture. Any questions?
More of an icebreaker question than anything. How do you pray in an hour adoration? Is there any formula, spirit of the
No,
moment?
actually, there's not, and you can even fall asleep in front of the Eucharist. I don't know if you know that, I think it was Teresa of Lisieux would fall asleep, and she apologized to the Lord, and he said to her, a physician on earth put you to sleep when they operate on your body. I put you to sleep to operate on your soul. So that's okay. Sometimes you just ponder, sometimes you read. A lot of times I read. When I went to Adoration at St. Monica, there was a family that would come 11 to midnight, and they brought their 7 or 8-year-old boy, and the boy would lay down in front of the monstrance and sleep every Sunday night from 11 to midnight in front of Jesus. So whatever. There was one college student used to bring his laptop with him, and he told me he was writing his thesis, and he said he got the best mark he ever got. He would bring it and do it in front of the Eucharist all the time. So it really is no protocol. You just let the Lord lead you.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.